Ms. LaViolette, please take the stand. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. Ms. LaViolette, you are still under oath. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. LaViolette.
Good morning, Ms. Wilmot.
All right, I know that we ended yesterday we were in October of 2007, where I believe we were talking about there's an inkling that Jodi was beginning to pull away.
Yes.
But just an inkling, right?
Just an inkling.
All right. So I want to talk to you about just a few days later on October 29th, 2007. And it's a journal entry. Judge, may I approach? This is exhibit been marked as 579. All right, and let me get you the journal. Can you give us an idea? Hold on. Can you give us an idea that your impression of this particular journal entry?
Yes, in this journal entry, Ms. Arias is talking about Mr. Alexander looking at her journal and wanting her to rip out the page where she really gets specific about some of the things he's called her and some of the things he said to her. And so she complies and rips out the page. She also talks about that words can be as hurtful as being hit, and she says sometimes that can actually take longer to heal.
So when she's talking about that, is she talking about emotional abuse?
She is.
And did you have a chance to actually look at her real journal, not just the photocopied pages?
Yes.
Judge, may I approach? I'm showing you the real journal, which is exhibit 242.001. And I have it opened up. Can you see in that journal pages torn out?
Yes, I can. There are pages torn out of the journal.
All right, and the pages that are torn out of the journal, the pages that are torn out are before October 29th, when she's talking about how he told her to tear up his pages.
Yes, they are.
Okay. And yesterday we talked about a journal entry on August 26th of 2007. We didn't discuss it necessarily, but in that particular journal entry, was there a half a page torn out as well?
I saw it yesterday. I'm trying to...
All right, but you remember seeing it yesterday?
Yes, I saw half a page torn out.
All right. Now, can you talk to us about what this means as far as Mr. Alexander's behavior is concerned?
Well, it goes along with the thinking of the laws of attraction, that you don't write negative things down, but the basic effect of this is to isolate her from even writing in her journal, which Ms. Arias has a long history of writing in journals and journaling since she was a child. And so this was a place where she could write, like people write Dear Diary, where she could write her most personal things. And what this meant was that even in that place, she needed to restrict what she wrote. So it further isolates her.
And what about Mr. Alexander's behavior? Is it controlling?
it is controlling behavior, and it also fits with that whole law of attraction kind of thing, that you write what you want to have happen. So when he says it, and he's introduced her to the law of attraction, pretty much, that it fits with the basic philosophy in PPL and in the way that they think. And so it can look less controlling because it fits philosophically, but it still has the impact of being very controlling.
And did you talk to Miss Arias also, besides reading in the journal, did you talk to Miss Arias about this incident where he tells her to tear out the pages?
Yes, I did.
And did you talk to her, when you were talking to her, did you talk to her about the lack of details in her journal?
Yes, I asked her about the lack of details. I was concerned about the lack of details in her journal. And she basically just let me know that it was not a good thing for her to be writing details, that Mr. Alexander read her journal, and that he asked her not to write these hateful, specific things down as part of forgiving and forgetting what was done.
Okay. Did she also feel the need to protect Mr. Alexander from the truth ever being known about what she was going through with him?
She was very concerned about his reputation.
All right, I want to talk to you about November 1st of 2007. Judge, may I approach? Show me what's been marked as Exhibit 580. On November 1st of 2007, can you give us an idea of your impressions of this journal entry?
Well, they made up, and he came over to her house for a couple nights. He snuck in after the roommates.
Sustained.
What is the subject matter? What is she talking about?
She's talking about them basically making up,
Okay.
and that he comes to the house.
It's her impressions, Judge, based on her reading of it.
Or her rules. You may answer.
Thank you. He comes to the house. She basically says, he gives me a treat. They make up, and she gives him a treat. So I'm assuming that means they were sexual.
Objection, speculation.
Okay. Do you know whether or not for sure that they were sexual?
No.
Okay. But is she talking in a positive way about Mr. Alexander?
Yes, she is.
And is she talking about the fact that they've had a couple of nights where he was being very good to her?
Yeah.
Objection, hearsay.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
All right. And so how does this fit within a cycle or what we've talked about before?
Well, as we've discussed, that cycle, which is sort of tension building, incident, and loving respite, it's just part of the cycle. It's part of that whole pattern where something happens that is unacceptable, and then there's forgiveness. There's based on the fact that the person is seeking forgiveness.
Okay. Is there anything in this journal entry that speaks to the secret of their relationship?
There's a journal, in the journal, it discusses that that her roommates are asleep
When Mr. Alexander
when
comes
Mr.
over?
Alexander comes over.
Okay. Okay. And on November 5th, a few days later, we get, well, let's talk about it. It's exhibit, marked as Exhibit 581. And can you tell us your impressions of this journal entry?
Basically, that he's apologizing, and
Objection, no response if she's asked for impressions.
Sustained.
Judge, that's her answer. This is her impressions.
Is that correct?
Yes,
You're going to provide your impressions,
yes.
not a verbatim statement of what is in the email.
No, not a verbatim
You
statement.
may continue.
That Mr. Alexander is apologizing.
Objection hearsay, we may approach.
You may. Continue.
Ms. Violet, we're talking about the November 5th journal entry.
Yes.
And by the way, all of these journal entries and emails that we've been going through and communications with other women from Mr. Alexander, are these things that you relied upon in making an ultimate opinion about the type of relationship that they had?
Yes.
Okay. Back to November 5th. Can you tell us what the subject matter is of this November 5th journal entry such that it became important to you in your ultimate opinion?
The subject matter was about critical words that were used, harsh words that were used in an argument between Miss Arias and Mr. Alexander, and that he didn't want those, he wanted forgiveness for that. So the forgiveness was part of it, and Jodi's willingness or an effort to forgive, despite the fact that she was hurt, despite the fact that she was,
Objection, hearsay.
Go ahead.
despite the fact that she was injured by these words, and she said she'd have a hard time forgetting them, but she wanted to forget them, and that part of forgetting them was not writing them down, and she was going to keep her word to Mr. Alexander not to write those things in her journal.
Okay. And part of why you rely on this journal entry in forming your ultimate opinion, does it have anything to do with the way Jodi handles these things or her empathy for situations?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Do you see in this journal entry, do you see Jodi giving Mr. Alexander empathy?
Yes, I
Empathizing
do.
with him?
Yes, I do.
How is that important to you?
It's important to me because it's one of the reasons that people stay in abusive relationships is that they care about the person who abuses them. And they stay because they maybe understand things about their childhood, maybe they understand about what they're going through currently, but it is a very important factor in people staying in relationship that isn't good for them.
All right. Let's talk about into December, December 4th. May I approach? This is exhibit Marcus 583. All right. And have you reviewed this exhibit prior to today?
Yes, I have.
I'm sorry, this particular journal entry?
Yes, I have.
All right. What is the subject matter of this journal entry such that it was important to your ultimate opinion?
The subject matter was hiding your relationship, which became important, and preserving an image of your sexual purity. It was a journal entry that talked about Miss Arias, Jodi, picking Mr. Alexander up from the airport to visit his grandmother who was ill, and her sneaking back into the house after his grandmother was asleep, and then leaving the house prior to his grandmother being awake.
And the sneaking in and leaving prior to his grandmother being awake, was that at Mr. Alexander's request?
Yes, it was.
So it wasn't anything that, when you say sneaking, it wasn't anything that Miss Arias did to try, for herself, to try and be sneaky, right?
No, it was, the alarm was set so that she would be able to leave.
Okay. What about this particular journal entry then is important to you in assessing their relationship?
Well, it's consistent with the report of at least one other woman who also had the same experience. It's consistent with the maintenance of an image of purity and keeping that reputation going,
By
that,
by Mr. Alexander?
by Mr. Alexander, of being a virgin at that point. It also is consistent with minimizing the importance of somebody in your relationship, that this person is not acknowledged, that this person is someone who is hidden from other people.
Meaning that Mr. Alexander is not acknowledging his relationship with Jodi in a public way?
Yes, and with at least one other woman as well.
Okay. And you talk about one other woman being treated the same way. Particularly, are you talking about a story with the grandma's house?
Yes,
Okay. And that happened with another woman as well?
yes.
Okay. Let's talk about on December 25th, Christmas
Yes.
of 2007, we have, are they celebrating Mr. Alexander and Miss Arias, are they celebrating Christmas together?
No, Jodi is with her family in Wairika.
Okay, and tell us about this particular incident. What about December 25th is important with regard to your opinion about their relationship?
Well, there was a conversation that Jodi was very excited about. Mr. Alexander asked her to call. She called him. He didn't call back. And she was saying to herself at this point, I need to remember this. I'm not supposed to write it in my journal, but I need to remember this because this is one of the reasons that I have a problem with him, that he doesn't keep his word to me. He doesn't do what he says he's going to do. And then she... Okay.
By the end of this incident, does she then talk about how Mr. Alexander has somehow come through for her?
Yes. At the end of the Christmas, at the end of Christmas time, Mr. Alexander, although his money is tight, goes out of his way to buy her some beautiful gifts, including a hymnal with her name in gold leaf, 1,000 places calendar, which, that's very important to them because that's one of the things that they do together is want to see the 1,000 places to see. He buys her a sweater and he buys her several other things. So he really goes, she feels very special because he's gone out of his way even though she knows he's struggling financially at that time. And so
through this, do you start to see Jodi pulling away a little bit at a time?
Objection, lady.
Oh, well, let me answer.
yes, she's pulling away a little at a time. She's starting to actually acknowledge that some of these things aren't okay. She's starting with a little distance to be able to look at them, but she's still very much involved in the relationship.
And I guess we talked a little bit about bottom lines and what happens in your practice when you deal with battered women and what happens when they have crossed their own bottom lines so many times. Can you tell us how crossing bottom lines relates into the relationship with Miss Arias and Mr. Alexander?
Yes, what I find when I'm working with battered women, when I work with them in the shelter and when I work with them in private practice, is that every time they cross their own bottom lines, they impugn their own integrity. So their integrity is wounded every time they do that, and they know that. And so it adds to the shame, it adds to the self-blame in terms of what's going on. And I am thinking about one of the women I worked with who was very successful in her own business, and I was seeing her for over a year before she could tell me some of the things that had happened to her because she was so ashamed of herself. I think what it does to your soul, what it does to your character, is to make you feel pretty terrible about yourself. And I think that holds people, keeps people stuck. But in this particular case, this young woman married someone, actually she was in her 30s when she married, which at, that time was a little older to be married. Very successful in her own business. She had a cat that she loved, and that cat was her baby before they got together. And one day she came home from work, and her husband worked from the house, and she saw him throwing her cat across the room. And she was very upset, and she confronted him, and he said he would never do anything like that again, explained to her how he was stressed out and things where he was having a bad day. And she said, I never saw anything directly like that, but over time in that relationship, I lost who I was. And she said, I came home, a couple of times and the food dish was empty, which never happened when I was taking care of my cat. And she said, and then one day I came home and his paws were cut. And he said, well, I dropped a glass. I thought I'd cleaned everything up, but I guess I didn't. And she said she always had kind of the sick feeling, but she never did anything about it. And then one day he took her cat and got in the car and left with that cat. And she knew she would never see her cat again. And she said, I didn't stop him, and I've never forgiven myself. And it took her over a year to do that. For every person in a battered relationship, their bottom line is different. What affects them, what changes them, it is different. But when there's sexuality involved, what I've seen with the victims of domestic violence is when there's sex involved, they feel as responsible, as to blame, and they almost look like incest survivors in taking on that blame.
When you talked about, when you're talking about sex involved, are you talking about in an abusive relationship if somebody's being sexually compromised?
Yes.
And can you explain what you mean by, how does that cross someone's bottom line?
If you're doing things that you don't want to do, even if you act like you like doing them, which I've seen people do a lot, or even if you like some of it, because usually people do like their sexual intimacy, and you keep doing it, and you're not doing it because you want to do it, you're doing it because you feel like that's what keeps the relationship together in part, you stop liking who you are, because this is not what you want. And I think that's, if you generalize that to many things, that most of us, when we do things that we want, either in a relationship or at a job, and we're compromised, we lose part of who we are when that happens. And you see this a little at a time. It's gradual. So nobody's losing all of themselves at once. It's that there's an analogy that if you throw a frog into a pot of boiling water, the frog is going to boil, but it's going to jump out. But if you put a frog in a pot of water and you slowly turn up the flame, the frog gets boiled because it's gradual and it doesn't know what's happening.
Oh, okay. All right. So akin, I guess, to abusive relationships, when they're gradual like this, the person doesn't necessarily have that reckoning that it's happening to them. Is that what you mean?
Yes, that's what I mean.
And you talked about when people are sexually compromised, that they act like incest survivors. What do you mean by that?
Well, when I work with incest survivors, part of what I see is them blaming themselves for the abuse that was directed at them. Even though they were children, usually I see them as adults, and they look through adult eyes and they blame themselves. So I've seen that with a number of the battered women I work with. And it's, by the way, it's the area that we get the least information on, because most people do not want to talk about their sexual relationships in a public venue.
Okay. All right. There are some text messages. We're going into the new year, right? And so did you review the text messages between Ms. Arias and Mr. Alexander?
Yes, I did.
All right. And talking about the new year, just my approach?
Yes. This is been marked as Exhibit 440.
messages between Mr. Alexander and Ms. Arias?
Yes,
And and they start in the end of 2007, is that right?
they actually start in 2006, it looks like.
Well, there's one that's marked 2006, right?
Yes, then they go to 2007.
Okay, and 2007 until June of 2008, is that right?
Yes,
Okay. All right. So, and if you need to refer to it, let me know.
okay.
But there were some emails in the beginning of, text messages in the beginning of January between Mr. Alexander and Miss Arias. Do you remember those?
Yes.
Okay, can you give us a general idea of what those were about?
The year started January 1st with Mr. Alexander texting Jodi and saying, "I love you, Jodi," and her.
Sustained.
The subject matter of the emails. So are they having are they nice emails?
They're nice emails.
Okay.
They're loving emails.
I'm sorry?
They're loving emails.
Loving emails. And does Mr. Alexander start the email loving emails?
Yes, he does.
And is Miss Arias responding?
Yes, she is.
Okay. And are they talking, is there something significant about these emails for you?
I think the significance is that they have good times in their relationship. This is not a relationship that is just a blemish. This is a relationship that has good periods of time where they're caring, where there's that ability to show love, that ability to connect, and that there's normal periods of time and positive periods of time in the relationship. It's not like the relationships on television that characterize domestic violence.
All right. And through these text messages in the beginning of January, do you see that that they act like a couple?
Yes, they do act like a couple.
All right. And are they talking about swapping cars?
Yes, there's yes, there's a real normal part where she's saying, "Can we, basically, can we swap cars today?" And he says yes. I mean, it's the normalcy of it. It's the what people do when they're in relationship. Can I borrow this? Can I borrow that? Can I use this? And it's just the normalcy of the relationship that I think becomes important to see.
Okay. All right. January 21st of 2008. Can we go there?
Yes.
All right. And you're aware that is the time when there is a second physical aggressive act?
Yes.
All right. Can you tell us about that incident?
Approach, please. May continue.
All right, Ms. LaViolette, did you speak with Ms. Arias in the 40 or 45 hours that you spoke with Ms. Arias? Did you speak to her about an incident that occurred on January 21st?
Yes, I did.
And did she tell you what happened?
Yes, she did.
All right. And based on that, can you tell us about the incident?
On January 21st, Ms. Arias was spending some time with Mr. Alexander, and I believe he had boxes out. He was moving some things, and he gave her something. And when she left, she forgot to take whatever that object was with her. And she was driving in her car. She turned around and came back, and when she came back, she went up to his room and found him masturbating to the picture of a little boy.
All right, and what does she do?
She freezes at first, then she runs out. She goes home, and her testimony is that her conversation with me is that she throws up. And she gets calls from Mr. Alexander, doesn't return them, goes to Temple, and
All right. And does she eventually go back to Mr. Alexander's house?
yes, she does.
And do they have a conversation?
They have a conversation, and she basically says that he talks and she listens. And she goes back because she thinks about him as a little boy and things she knows about his own childhood. And she goes back, and he tells her that sex with women make him feel a lot more normal.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
That sex with women makes him feel normal.
Okay. Now, I want to stop you at this point because you said that she goes back because she starts to picture him as a child.
Yes.
What is that about as far as how Jodi is feeling about the situation?
Well, I think it's about empathy again, because she is privy and aware of the things that happened to him in his childhood, and feels for him as a child, and thinks about him being a little boy.
Okay. And so when she goes back and they have this conversation, does she also, how does she feel about it after the conversation?
Well, I think she feels that he needs help
All right.
after the conversation.
Okay. All right. The next day,
Yes.
does she go back?
She goes back to his house the next day.
All right. And what happens? Did she talk to you about what happens the next day?
The next day, they're talking. He wants to borrow some money from her. She says, I don't have any more money, basically, to loan you. I've loaned you almost $700. He calls her selfish. They have an argument. And during this argument, he grabs her and throws her to the floor. And when she hits the floor, she makes a sound, and he says, basically, don't act like that hurts, bitch. This hurts. And he kicks her. And then he kicks her a second time, and she's trying to block that kick. And he kicks her finger and breaks it. She shows me her hand. I see that her finger's broken, or it looks broken, that it's healed. And
Check the NICA Foundation.
Sustained.
Have you seen her finger?
yes, I have seen her finger.
All right. And is it crooked?
Yes, it's crooked.
Okay. When her hand incidentally, when her hand is bent, all of her fingers are bent. Can you tell that finger's crooked at all?
I actually didn't look at her hand being bent,
Oh,
so
okay.
I don't know.
All right. All right. So what happens then after he kicks her?
He leaves the room and goes somewhere other than where she is.
Does she know where he goes?
No, she doesn't.
Okay. And then what happens?
She's concerned, according to the prosecution expert, she's not scared. When I interviewed Miss Arias, she said,
Check this to the non-responsive nature involving me.
Has she ever, to your knowledge, has she made statements about not being scared?
yes, she's made statements about not being scared.
Okay, but were those to you?
No, not to me.
All right. What did she tell you about?
She says, she doesn't say, I'm scared. She says, I'm not sure where he's going, and I wondered if he's getting a weapon. And that sounds like scared to me.
Okay. And does he ultimately come back to the room?
He comes back to the room, and he splints her finger for her. And
Okay. All right.
that's it.
All right. And so he splints her finger. So let's talk about this incident as a whole. I guess one of my first questions is do you remember having an interview with Mr. Martinez?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And during that interview, did you ever tell him that the pictures were viewed on a computer?
Yes,
Something
I
to
did.
that effect?
Yes, I did.
Okay. In review of your notes and the situation with regard to this case, did Miss Arias ever actually tell you that?
No, she never told me that the pictures were on a computer.
Okay. So was
What?
that you misspeaking or what happened?
That was me misspeaking. I am so used to,
Objection, the other scope of the question.
Why would you make that mistake, do you think?
I'm one of the few people I know who still does hard copies of pictures, and I assume that younger people are doing almost everything over the internet, so when I hear about pictures, that's where I went and I misspoke.
All right. Okay. Tell us, well, first of all, what's interesting, I guess, is that does Jodi ever get medical help for this? Actual medical help is besides the splint from Mr. Alexander?
No, she doesn't.
How is that unusual at all to you?
No, it's not unusual to me.
Why not?
I'm not sure who all knows it, but if you go to the emergency room with an injury, and that injury is caused by a partner in California, and I believe it's true here in Arizona.
Objection, speculation. Arizona.
Tell us what happens in California.
It's a mandatory report to the police. So
So in other words, if somebody says that they're injured from their partner,
the police
then-
are called.
okay.
The police are called. So, and what I find to be most true is that there's not a lot of record of medical or police calls in a lot of domestic violence cases. That when people are intending to stay together, they don't call the police because they don't want their partners arrested, they don't want a record, that kind of thing. It's more a protective stance. And by the way, that will go for victims of either gender as well.
Victims of either gender, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And so I guess we're talking about medical, but then you touched on police reports. Are you aware whether or not Miss Arias ever notified the police about Mr. Alexander breaking her finger?
She did not notify the police.
All right. And can you tell us, in your opinion, expert opinion, is it based on some of the things you were just telling us? Why?
Yes, it is. That people don't want to involve, in general, the police and have the police come to their homes, come to their, they don't want the embarrassment. They want to protect the reputation in the family. If the person has a job that might hinge on not having a police record, they don't want that to happen. And every state is different in how they approach that, and actually within states, counties are different in how they approach that enforcement, but there's generally a law. But the way the law is enforced can differ, despite the policy can differ from county to county.
All right. And you were talking about job loss and things like that. Particular to Mr. Alexander's situation and what Jodi knows about him, being a leader in the community and a priesthood holder in the temple, and how he's thought of in the community. Does that give him more to lose, I guess?
It gives him a lot to lose. It gives him his reputation, and it gives him his job, because many of the people he works with in PPL are part of the same religious community.
All right, and so what does that mean for Jodi then, knowing this about him?
Well, what it means for lots of women or victims of domestic violence, which is you don't want to destroy the reputation of that other person.
Okay. All right. Can we talk about the kicking? You said that he kicked her.
Yes.
That's how her finger was broken because she put her hand out?
Yes.
Is there, what's the conflict tactic scale?
The conflict tactic scale is a list of aggressive acts, which starts with what's called mild aggression and goes to severe aggression. And it was developed by Mary Strauss and Richard Gellis and was used in research. But basically it lists acts, and what they call mild acts are things like hitting, pushing, grabbing, restraining, slapping.
Okay, sorry, stop there. We're talking mild acts?
Those are called mild acts.
Okay, and have you seen that so far have you seen any of that in the relationship with regard to Mr. Alexander and Jodi?
I've seen during the first incident what was called mild acts. I differ in how I feel about this, by the way.
Oh.
I don't think that necessarily is a mild act, but
Okay,
that's listed as a more mild act.
That's your last statement.
she's an expert.
Overruled.
Okay, we'll talk about that in a second then, how you
Okay.
differ. But okay, let me let you, I'm sorry I interrupted. Let me let you finish what the conflict tactic scale is. So we have this list of mild acts, and then what else?
And then there is a list of what are called severe acts, and severe acts are things like punching, choking, hair pulling, kicking, use of a weapon, that sort of thing.
All right. And you were telling us that you disagree with this. Do you disagree with the whole thing, or what do you disagree with?
I disagree with what's called mild acts, because mild acts of aggression, first of all, there's nothing about psychological abuse on the conflict tactic scale,
Okay, so it's
which
all...
is incredibly important in the context of domestic violence.
Okay, and so it's all talking about physical abuse.
It's talking about physical, and then it asks, in the research, it asks, have you ever done anything like this in your relationship? And if you say yes, you're put in the aggressive group. And if you say no, you're put in the if you say yes, you're put in the aggressive group. If you say no, you're put in the non-aggressive group.
Okay.
But nobody asked why you did it. So it's not just a matter of did I do something, it's a matter of why did I do what I did. So, did I hit you in an act of self-defense? Did I hit you because we've been going through stress for a long period of time? Did I hit you because I lost a job? We don't know why that is. And in addition to that, we don't know the result. So we don't know if there's fear. So you can have what's called a mild act of aggression, and you could still have a high level of fear.
All right. And what happens since this particular scale isn't talking about emotional abuse, what happens when you add emotional abuse or psychological abuse to these mild acts? Is that something that causes fear then, or more likely?
Well, what psychological abuse does is tear away your character.
Okay.
So that when you are physically abused, you're already in a place where you feel bad about yourself. You're already in a place where you question your own perceptions. You're already in a place where you doubt your integrity. You're already in a place where your self-esteem is going down, because this is the mood of the relationship. The mood of the relationship is created in this context of psychological abuse. You add physical abuse to it, and you add layers of fear, other kinds of fear in that relationship.
Okay. All right. And so, given that information, is it important to you that in this particular physical incident or aggression that he kicks her? Does that make a difference to you?
Yes.
What does it show you?
It shows me an escalation, that in a period of 3 months, October, November, December, January, in a period of 3 months, that there's been an escalation from what would be called a mild act of aggression to a more severe act of aggression.
Okay. So you see an escalation in physical acts?
I see an escalation in the intensity of what happens, and then you've got a relatively short period of time. 3 months is a short period of time, from my perspective, between physical acts of aggression.
And we talk about your perspective. Is that your perspective as an expert in doing this for so long and speaking to battered women and speaking to recovering abusive men?
Yes.
Okay. So in that sense, in that term, the 3 months that happened between the time of the first incident to the time of the second physical incident, is that what you're talking about, the frequency?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And then kicking, since that's considered something severe on the conflict tactic scale, is that what you're talking about, the intensity?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Okay. So add to that, do you see prior to these physical aggressive acts? Prior to that, do you see emotional abuse going on?
Yes.
And do you see, we talked about how that can start subtly and where people don't necessarily realize it. Do you see it starting with a subtle start like that?
Yes, I think it starts with the name calling, like skank, and then making that like a joke.
Okay, and let me ask you, that alone, would that alone enforce or support an abusive relationship?
No.
Okay, all right, sorry, continue.
No. And looking specifically at Jodi and Mr. Alexander's relationship, and then the supportive emails from other women or text messages or,
Instant messages?
The incidents described by other women, you see a pattern of that sort of subtle abuse where the name calling or the putting down of somebody's values in relationships that are less long and less intense than the one between Mr. Alexander and Jodi Arias.
Okay. And so, do you see any issues with the escalation in guilt coming from Mr. Alexander?
I'm not sure.
Well, we just were talking about the day before that he's caught masturbating to a picture of a little boy.
Right.
And at first he's talking to Miss Arias about how upset he is with himself, and she's empathizing with him, right?
Right.
And then the very next day, we see he gets upset with her for not loaning him money, and he kicks her, right?
Oh, okay, so you're asking if he's more guilty.
Can you tell us that?
I would think that he would feel more guilty.
Sustained?
All right. Well, let me ask you this. Generally speaking, when an abusive partner has guilt about what they've done or guilt about whatever, what does that do to that person?
What I've seen over the years is that a couple of things.
Okay.
Anytime you do something that hurts your partner, whether that's physical, whether that's psychological, and you really hurt them, that you get guilty. And the other thing it does, and I've seen this over the years in my group, is that the men will talk about how scared they are after they've done something because they worry about their partners leaving. And when they're worried about their partners leaving, any aggressive act, whether it's psychological or verbal or psychological or physical, it's evidence that she has or the victim has more reason to leave. So anytime you do something that hurts your partner, you've got evidence. You're looking at the evidence that they have reason to leave. So your fear goes up, but your guilt goes up too.
And you're talking about the abusive person.
Yes.
Their fear goes up and their guilt goes up.
Yes.
Okay.
And what I've seen is that when somebody feels guiltier, right, and then they look in the eyes of the person that they've hurt, it triggers their rage and their anger because of the powerlessness that they feel behind the guilt that they feel.
All right. And so can it make somebody particularly more dangerous then if they have that fear, that built on fear and guilt?
Yeah, I think fear makes someone more dangerous. In general, human beings more dangerous. But what I see is the fear of loss, which I think is a human fear, gets exaggerated in domestically abusive relationships. And there's a tremendous fear of loss in those relationships.
All right. And
by the way, when there's a fear of loss, there tends to be more controlling behavior.
Okay. So up until this point in January, did you start to see Jodi starting to pull away from the relationship?
Little bits at a time, yes.
Okay. And can that contribute then to Mr. Alexander's fear of loss?
It's
Speculation.
I'm sorry, what was the answer?
It could.
All right. So as of this particular, in late January of 2008, given everything you know about the abuse that's occurred before and now the kicking on this time, how would you characterize their relationship at this point in time, given your expertise in the area?
I would call it a domestically abusive relationship.
Okay. All right. So, and that's based on everything that we were just talking about?
Yes.
Okay. After this incident in January, and you talked about the escalation in frequency and the escalation in intensity, what effect does that have on women in a relationship when they have experienced this escalation of intensity?
Well, it tends to add to their fear, and when I speak to victims of domestic violence, they might not talk about being fearful of their partners all the time, and generally they don't.
Okay.
So I ask them, are you afraid when your partner gets angry? And that's when they say, yes, I'm afraid when my partner gets angry. And they may be doing things and watching their behavior in areas that they know may specifically aggravate the partner. So they may be adapting behaviors or adopting behaviors that they're not even aware they're adopting, but that will ameliorate the tension in the relationship.
Okay. All right. And that's part of the victim starting to make changes in their own life, basically, not knowing that they're changing their personality or changing their personality?
These are behavioral changes that can add to the character changes, but the character changes tend to be more associated with the psychological abuse and put downs and that sort of thing.
Okay. So the psychological abuse and everything relates to the loss of self-esteem and things like that. Is that what you mean?
It does. The physical abuse certainly does as well.
Okay.
But because there's generally more psychological abuse in a relationship, it creates a mood in that relationship so that even when there isn't physical violence present, there's that mood that, what's wrong with me kind of mood.
Okay. All right. And then have you seen then women tend to change their behaviors, I guess? Is that what you're saying? Change their behaviors so that they try to not experience another violent incident?
Yes. Preventative behaviors.
Preventative behaviors. Okay. All right. That makes sense. So, but even when we have this type of escalation and in frequency and intensity, are there still periods in relationships where things are good again?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think that's the glue. That's the glue that holds the relationship together, is that feeling that, and once again, when we look at learned hopefulness, there are periods where things are better and it gives people a chance to regroup and hope that they will stay better.
Okay. And we've talked about learned hopefulness, and that's, but I guess that's part of the glue of keeping them together. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Did you review text messages from between Mr. Alexander and Jodi in early February?
Yes.
And specifically talking about February 8th of 08, starting there. And if you wanted to look at the exhibit, I believe it's 440, the exhibit, to refresh your recollection of those.
February 8th.
Through February 14th.
Through the 14th, okay. Yes.
Okay. What about the subject matter of those text messages is important to you, such in your ultimate opinion, with regard to their relationship?
It's really characteristic of those periods where things are going well, where Mr. Alexander is asking her to do some favors. She does them. He's very appreciative of those favors. She tells him he's wonderful. He appreciates that. He's gracious to her. So it's really that normalcy, that period that's just nice and feels good. and it's
Okay.
the connection after an incident.
All right. And is he doing anything that's making her feel special?
I'm going to have to review that again
Sure. On February 10th.
on February 10th. Oh, right. I remember that. He sang to her.
Beyond the scope of the question, yes or no?
Sustained, ask another question.
All right. So you remember whether or not he was doing something to make her feel special?
Yes.
Okay. And is he planning something especially for her?
He is. There are a couple things. One is that he has a very special place for her. He wants to take her. And they're going to a Super Saturday meeting. I'm actually not sure what that is, but I know it's a regular meeting that they have. And they're going to that meeting, and then he has a place that he knows is just going to be terrific for her, and it will be something that'll knock her socks off. And he knows her well enough to know that she'll really like this. And the other thing he does is sing to her.
Okay. And so given that planning and everything, is that something that is going to make her feel good about herself?
Sure.
And does that bring her back into the relationship?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And brings him back into it as well.
All right. So it's bonding. Is it bonding them again?
Yes. And it's part of the character of someone who's abusive isn't just abusive.
Right.
Someone who's abusive has wonderful traits as well. They're not just an abusive person. They have the things about them that people love and appreciate and want to spend time with.
Okay. And this is one of those times.
Yes.
All right. I want to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 584. This is a journal entry from February 15th of 2008. And by the way, in January and February, Jodi's still living in Mesa, Arizona. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, you ready? Okay. All right. The subject matter of this particular journal entry, what's the subject matter in this particular entry that is important to you with regard to your opinion with regard to their relationship?
Miss Arias is starting an LDS link-up account. She's starting to explore meeting some other men.
What's an LDS link-up account as far as you know?
It's a site specific to Mormon singles.
Okay, for Mormons to meet other Mormon single
Yes.
people?
Uh-huh.
All right. And so she starts an LDS link-up account for herself?
Yes.
All right. And does she talk about feeling special because of what we just discussed in the text messages?
She does. She talks about him taking her to that surprise place and that's exciting and that she feels very good.
All right.
But she's also not sure if they're still going because he's having some financial trouble.
Okay. All right. So then, what do you see as important to you from what she's doing right now in her own life?
That she's starting to pull away a little bit more, that she's starting to get a little bit more independent, that she's starting to realize maybe that this relationship is not going where she wants to, because the beginning of 2008, her first goal was to get married, and this doesn't look like a relationship where that's going to happen, so she's starting to do things to pull away a little at a time from the relationship.
Okay. And so are you seeing a gradual progression of her starting to pull away, starting with the inkling in October where she's starting to realize things aren't right, to actually now we see her taking an action, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And the behavior is important because behavior is evidence.
Okay, so you mean her behavior of actually signing up with LDS LinkUp?
Yes.
Okay. All right, and so can we talk about text messages on February 25th of 2008?
Yes.
All right. Is there a string of text messages in which the content of them, of what Jodi is doing in response to Mr. Alexander, is important to you?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Okay, yes. So then tell me what the subject matter, what is it that she's doing that's important to you?
She's driving she's been away. She's driving back. She's spend time with Mr. Alexander. And on the drive back, he's upset with her because she's not answering her phone and not responding to his texts quickly enough. And basically, she's having to justify what's happening, that she isn't responding, that she's talking about her phone not working real well or being slow to text. She's talking about singing in the car and not hearing that the phone is rung and that sort of thing.
All right, so is she giving him reasons why she's not picking up the phone?
Yes.
And is this more than just one text between the two about it?
Yeah, there's a number of texts.
Okay, and is there a number of text messages from Miss Arias talking about why she missed his call?
Yes.
And is she apologetic?
Yes, she's apologetic. She also explains to him, she tells him that she didn't even...
And she also does what?
She tells him that...
Can you tell me that, generally speaking?
Yes. On the ride back, she wants to take pictures of Hoover Dam. She's a photographer. She wants to take those pictures, and she hasn't stopped to take those pictures because she's anxious to get back and see Mr. Alexander.
Okay, so she's giving up something that she would want to do to try and get back to him sooner?
Yes.
What about this particular string of text messages at the end of February of 2008? What about this is important to you? What does it tell you about their relationship?
Well, basically that she has to justify if she doesn't respond to him very quickly, and that he needs a quick response, and when he wants a quick response, she ought to give it to him. And if she doesn't, she needs to be able to explain why she can't.
Okay. And does that speak to Mr. Alexander's behavior? Of whether or not he's controlling?
Well, it seems like controlling behavior to me.
Okay. And in these text messages, in her response to him, is she ever in any way abusive to him in her responses?
No, she isn't. She's not placating exactly, but she's de-escalating. She's explaining to him in ways that would not be escalating why she's late, and trying to comfort him, actually.
Okay. Is that something that you see, generally speaking, in your practice, de-escalation from women?
Yeah, not always, but
Okay.
certainly a lot. And at some point, people get angry. At some point, people get assertive. But there's a pattern, generally speaking, for at least a period of time where they're really trying to calm things down, and they really believe that they can. They really believe that if they just do certain things, that things will be better.
Okay. And you said, but not always,
No.
right? We talked before about how the social media portrays victims of domestic abuse and the perpetrators, and how the victims of domestic abuse are perfect angels and they're always backing down, things like that, and the perpetrators are just nothing but evil, and how that was false.
Yes.
So is that what you're talking about, how there is a generally speaking, de-escalation, but it doesn't always happen that way?
No, it doesn't always happen that way.
And are victims of domestic abuse, are they able to get angry?
They absolutely are able to get angry.
Okay.
Victimization, anger can be a byproduct of victimization. So there can be anger, and then it usually fades. Anger doesn't tend to have a real long period. People usually get angry, it peaks, and it comes down unless you have one of those bumper stickers that says, "I don't get mad, I get even," and then you've been able to carry it on for a while and you've been able to play it. But for a lot of people, anger sort of peaks and then comes down.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about a journal entry on February 26th. This is what's been marked as Exhibit 585. Okay. In the beginning of the journal entry, is she talking about a sexual experience that they have?
She's talking about a drive back from,
Objection beyond the scope. Is she talking about?
Sustained rephrase.
What is she talking about in the beginning, subject matter?
the subject matter at the beginning is her drive back from Las Vegas and wanting to spend time with Mr. Alexander.
Okay. And what is important, the subject matter of this particular journal entry, what is important about it to you?
That when they got together, that she talks about, or the mood is that he's tender, that he's sweet, that he's loving, and that they have a really good sexual experience, a close sexual experience.
And is she describing that as a tender experience?
She describes it as a tender experience, yes.
Okay. And why is that important to you?
Once again, that's one of the bonding parts of the relationship. And when the sexuality bonds people if it's sweet and loving, and I can bond people even when it's not, but it's a powerful emotion, it's a powerful pull in a relationship, and when people are sexual and have a good sexual experience, they feel good.
Okay. Does she talk about things in terms of closure?
Yes, she actually, there's discussion in the journal about this maybe being so sweet and tender because the relationship may be coming to an end, because Mr. Alexander is wanting to have a relationship with a woman named Mimi, and that Miss Arias is feeling happy for him, and she thinks she must have unconditional love because she's not freaking out about this. She feels good about him having this relationship, and she wants him to be happy.
And so is that further evidence of her moving on?
It seems to be, yes, that she's able to let go a little bit and just feel good that he could be happy and feel good that he could have another relationship.
Does she talk about the fact that she planned not planned, I guess, it was a spontaneous trip to Las Vegas, and how are you aware of her making a spontaneous trip to Las Vegas instead of spending time with Mr. Alexander at a pizza place?
I'm aware of her going to Las Vegas. I didn't know if it was a spontaneous trip or not, and I knew that she had canceled or rescheduled a.
Sustained.
Okay, let me, on what's been marked on this exhibit, page 771.
Page what?
771.
Okay.
And then the next page.
Okay.
Okay. Is she talking about being excited about meeting someone else?
She is. She's talking about a man by the name of Sam Schultz, and that she's excited to meet him.
Okay. And does she talk about this Vegas trip?
She does.
Okay. What about the Vegas trip is important to you?
That Mr. Alexander wants her to come back a day early, and that she doesn't. She stays an extra day or an extra night. I'm not sure exactly the time, but she spends extra time there, despite the fact that Mr. Alexander wants her to come back, that she is actually setting a limit here and doing something she wants to do and not as compelled. So she's getting a little steel in her backbone here.
Okay. Do you see starting to set boundaries with him?
Yes.
And unlike, I guess, when we were talking in 2007 with the Diamondbacks game, remember that
Yes.
incident where she drives all the way back, has her friend drive her all the way back to Mr. Alexander's house?
Right.
Okay, so in this situation now, not quite a year later, but in this situation, is he asking to spend time with her and asking her to end a personal trip that she is enjoying for him?
Yes.
And is it important to you that she's able to say no?
Yes.
Does that give more evidence to you that she is further breaking away from him?
Yes.
What about the fact that she's excited to meet this Mr. Schultz?
That's another piece of evidence that she's starting to be able to pull away and starting to be interested in someone else.
Okay. And when she's talking about Mr. Alexander being interested in this person, Mimi, taken as a whole, not just this journal entry, but taken as a whole, given everything you've read, does she talk often about how she wants Mr. Alexander to be happy?
Yes, she does.
And does she talk often about her concern for him trying to build a relationship with Mimi?
Yes.
And a concern being that she wants him to be able to do it.
She wants him to be able to do it, and she doesn't want to be the person that gets in the way.
Okay. In any of these conversations, either through her journal entries or in instant messages or other communications that you read, did you ever see any seeds of jealousy coming from Jodi?
No, I didn't. I did not.
And for the most part, does she talk about unconditional love for Mr. Alexander?
She talks about it. She talks about caring about him. She talks about unconditional love several times that I remember, for sure, and in interviews with her. But she also does not talk about being jealous. I don't see evidence of jealousy in the text messages or the IMs or any of the communication that I've looked at.
Okay. All right. And this, now we're talking a timeline. We're at the end of February in 2008, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So, and is she still in Mesa at this point, living in Mesa?
At the end of February, yes, she is.
Okay. All right. On February 29th, do you recall reviewing communications between Mr. Alexander and Jodi, again, talking about unconditional love?
I don't specifically remember. I would need to be refreshed.
Okay. Do you remember ever talking about, or Mr. Alexander talking about how he's choked up by what Miss Arias does?
Yes, I do remember him saying that he was choked up by communication that she gave him about wanting him to be happy.
Okay. So, in other words, based on those communications, is he touched by what she says to him?
Yes, yes. Yes, he is touched.
Okay.
He indicates that he's touched.
All right. And do they talk about how noteworthy their relationship has been with each other?
Actually, Mr. Alexander, Yes.
They do.
Yes.
Who talks about it?
Mr. Alexander talks about it.
And generally speaking, what is he talking about?
He says basically that,
Sustained.
Generally speaking. So you're not
that
going to
he's
quote.
had more memorable experiences with Jodi than he has with anyone else in his life, and that they will be immortalized with each other basically forever.
Okay. Is this something that is, would you characterize this as talking about the relationship as special?
Yes.
And is this something where we're talking, where Jodi is going to feel special by having this type of attention?
I think anybody would be touched by having that kind of, to have someone say to them that you are more, memorable than anyone else in my life, or we've had more noteworthy experiences, is a very positive thing.
Okay. And this is Mr. Alexander saying such things to Jodi as you're at the same time that you're seeing evidence more and more of her pulling away from him. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I want to talk to you about March 2nd. And I think I'm going to need a second. All right. On March 2nd, are you aware of a situation where there is a third violent episode?
Yes.
And does it happen in Mr. Alexander's car?
Yes.
Overruled.
Can you tell us what happened? Well, let me ask you this. Did you talk to Miss Arias about it?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And have you reviewed journal entries surrounding this time period?
I have reviewed journal entries.
Okay. Tell us what happened with the third violent incident.
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
Okay, generally speaking, can you tell us what happened with the third violent incident?
Objection, hearsay.
Approach, please.
All right, so we're talking about the third violent incident, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the fact that he is violent with her, again, is that important to you?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and did you get this info, in learning about what happened, did you take this into your ultimate opinion about their type of relationship that they had, that he was, again, violent with her?
Yes.
Okay, so can we talk about what happened on this particular incident where he was violent with her again, specifically about the importance of the incident, what happened and why it's important to you?
There was discussion about her moving to Wairika. There was an argument, and he was upset and slapped her across the face. She was crying. She called her mother to ask her mother to help her come move, but never told her mother what had happened. And they really basically didn't talk much about it.
All right. And where does this incident take place?
In Mr. Alexander's car.
Okay. And when you say that they're talking about her moving, is she telling him that she's going to move?
Yes.
Okay, so she's breaking news to him that she is out.
Yes, that she's moving back to Wairika, and that she thinks it's an important step for both of them.
Okay. And his response, does he get upset?
He gets upset.
And does he get so upset then that he hits her?
Yes.
Objection, answer,
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. This is happening when they're in a car. By the time that they finish with this episode, how does this end up? How is he treating her? Is he able to calm down?
He's able to calm down and kisses her tenderly.
Okay. And did you review a journal article on March 2nd of 2008, and this is exhibit number 471, March 2nd of 2008, where she talks about being picked up so they can go to a tax seminar,
Yes.
and that they ended up not going?
Yes.
And does she say in her journal that she tells him, my plans to move back to Eureka, and that I probably wouldn't be plugging into PPL events anymore?
Yes, she does say that.
And does she say that this will help us both move on and close the gap?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, she does.
And is this further evidence to you that she is attempting to break away from him?
Yes, it is. It's behavioral steps, and I think, when I work with victims of domestic violence, one of the things that I do in therapy is to give them assignments that are specific to them, and they would be assignments so that they have tangible evidence that they can do something that makes a difference in their own lives, because in part, what I've seen with the victims of domestic violence is they're trying to solve the wrong problem, which keeps them very stuck in their relationship. They're trying to change the behavior of the person who is violent with them, and they can't. So what I try to do when I'm working with them is to refocus them on behaviors they can actually have an impact on. So I would give them an assignment, and once they do that assignment, they have tangible evidence. And so it helps to rebuild self-esteem.
Who has tangible evidence?
The victim has tangible evidence that they can make a difference in their own lives.
Oh, okay, all right. And so because of that, you say it helps build their self-esteem?
It's sort of foundational to rebuilding self-esteem,
Okay.
to feel like you can accomplish something that you are trying to accomplish, something
right.
that you want to do for yourself.
So like steps at a time.
Yes.
And do you see that through this incident, do you see that Jodi is doing this on her own, taking little steps at a time?
Yes, I do.
And in here, I know that obviously in March of 2008, she hadn't moved yet, right?
Right.
But is it important that she is able to actually tell Mr. Alexander that she's going to move?
Yes.
Okay.
It's important. It's a big step.
Why is that?
Because I think it would be a hard thing to say, and because she's not out of the relationship. She's just taking a step. She's taking a big step, but she's taking a step. She's not removed from him. She cares about him. She cares about how he feels, and she cares about their relationship.
And is this something that you see in your practice when you see women who may make a step, but then they might come back again?
Yes.
And then they make another step, and then they come back again?
Yes.
Okay. And in this particular journal article or journal entry, does she say that she and Travis talked some more in his car, and they were able to say some things, or at least she was, that they've been wanting to say for a long time?
Yes.
And does she talk about it beginning of a bittersweet closure?
Yes, she does.
But even though she's talking about closure, does she go on to say that he is her best friend in the whole world?
Yes.
And that to her at this point, this is what you're talking about, I guess, where she's not out of the relationship. Because to her, she says it's so unimaginable to live without him. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I mean, yes.
Okay. And she ends that sentence with, but it has to be this way. It will be better for us both.
Yes.
Okay. So is that evidence of her starting the ability to see what's wrong and start to move?
Yes, and it's and looking at her own healing, looking at his healing, looking at her healing.
Okay. She's looking at them, you mean she's looking at his healing? Or
I
what do you
think,
mean?
well, because she has talked in other places about this is not, the relationship has not been morally, spiritually good for either one of them. That's what she says.
Okay. Now, in this particular journal entry, do you see anywhere that she actually says that he hits her?
No.
Okay. And is this typical for her for her journal entries?
Objection, speculation.
Overruled.
It's consistent with her promise to him that she's not going to write details about negative things in her journal.
And do you see that here then when the way she's discussing or talking about how they have a discussion but not actually going into how bad it was?
Yes.
Okay. And she talks about how she leans in to give him a hug and he gives her 3 very tender, very slow, very soft kisses.
Yes.
Okay. Is that something where you would see in a cycle where there's a peak, the tension builds, there's a peak where he hits her, and then now we're back down to where he's giving her tender kisses?
Yes.
And the next part of the journal, she talks about how he's dropping her off and she goes inside, fixes her makeup, right?
Yes.
And then she goes to Starbucks and she gets Travis a Frappuccino and she goes to his house.
Yes.
Okay, so is that something that you see in these types of relationships and abusive relationships with this cycle where now they've made up and he's being sweet and now she does something nice for him, getting him a Frappuccino and now going to his house?
Yes.
Okay. And is that consistent with an abusive relationship?
Yes, it is. It's not consistent with everyone, but it's consistent with many of them.
Okay. All right, and I guess, and that begs the question, is there any one format that every domestic abusive relationship follows?
No, there isn't. There are things that typify abusive relationships, but every human being is different, so the nuances of every relationship can be different based on the differences in human beings.
Okay. And so in your practice, how is it that you're able to know the difference when something's abusive and something's just not?
Well, you look at patterns of behavior, you look at escalating patterns, you look at the quality of what's happening, you look at the quality of emotional abuse, the name-calling, the put-downs, areas of control, you look at power differences, you look at physical incidents. There are a lot of things you look at, and what I try to do is interview, if I'm working with a family. Well, first of all, I don't do family work right away at all. But when someone comes in and they want couples counseling, I separate them and interview them both separately to sort of get both of their perspectives on things. But I ask them questions because I never know if somebody's referring to me for domestic violence or they're coming to me for couples counseling. So I need to figure that out a little bit. So I have questions that I ask people to try to assess whether this is a domestic abuse relationship we're talking about or if this is a couples issue that we're talking about, a family issue.
Okay. And by those simple questions, can you make a complete assessment or does it just give you an idea?
It gives me an idea. Sometimes I can make an assessment because I'm listening. Generally speaking, if there is a victim and a perpetrator in a relationship, you'll hear different versions of the story. Well, you do anyway. You hear different versions because people have different ways of seeing things. But when someone comes in and they've been a victim of domestic violence, sometimes you're the first person they've ever talked to. And when they talk to you, sometimes it's like the floodgate opens, and so you hear things. Sometimes they're really careful, and they're very protective of the person, and they want to make sure that you're not going to report them for something. I always tell people about the limits of my confidentiality as a counselor, because if there's child abuse or danger to self or danger to other people, imminent danger, I need to report that. But I've had people tell me details of incident that happened once I assure them that within these parameters, as long as it does not fall within these parameters, that it is going to be confidential with me. And the other thing I have to tell them is that what they each tell me separately is confidential as well, that I'm not going to, when the other person comes in, tell them what you said. So there's a privacy factor.
Okay. In talking about this third violent incident on March 2nd, and the previous one was January 22nd, so just a little over a month apart, does that mean anything to you?
Yeah, just an escalation. Once again, you're seeing a short period of time between incidents. So where you went from about 3 months, you go to about a month.
So that talks about escalation?
Yes.
And what about, so the fact that he's, that there's not violent acts once a week or 3 times a week, does that mean that this isn't abusive?
Not at all. I mean, when you look at the range of abusive behaviors, you don't have to have violent incidents frequently to remember a violent incident.
Okay.
Because it's traumatizing to have someone be violent with you. So when people can have long-term effects of violence. It's one of the empathy exercises that I do with men in my program. And when I've worked with female perpetrators as well, is to have them look at something that happened to them a long time ago and look at the long-term effects that's had on them. So it's an important thing to look at. There are long-term effects for things that stand out in people's minds. Most of us have things that have happened in our lives that we look back on and we still have feelings about that could have happened 20 or 30 years ago, or longer than that, depending on how old we are. But
And so when we have a violent incident in January, and just because we don't have another one until March of 2008, that doesn't mean necessarily that that there's not this feeling or mood setting in between the two?
absolutely not.
Okay.
And by the way, it's rare. The 3 times a week, that's the smallest percentage of people who are violent, are physically violent 3 times a week. That's the smallest percentage of people.
So actually being violent that often is rare?
It's the most extreme in regard to physical violence. Now, when you're looking at emotional violence, we actually don't, people tend to count tangible events like physical acts and are able to do that in a way that they can't with psychological acts, because psychological acts, as I said, become a mood, become a generalized feeling. So tangible acts are easier to describe. It's hard to describe to someone when somebody says something to you and it hurts, and you're not sure how to say that to somebody, and you're probably not going to. But I can say, I was slapped on this day, and that's a much easier thing to talk about.
And is that easier for people to understand also?
It's easier for people to understand. I mean, recently, it's been a fairly recent phenomenon that people are talking more and more about verbal and emotional abuse and the serious consequences of those forms of abuse on people. I also, by the way, have people who are sophisticated enough that they are actually not doing physical abuse because they know they can be arrested for it, and much more of the abuse is controlling behavior and psychological.
You mean you actually have seen perpetrators do that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about a journal entry on March 13th, okay? So what is this? Not even 2 weeks later, right? From March 2nd? If we're going to March 13th?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a yes?
I'm sorry.
I
missed it.
You just said, uh-huh. Is that a yes? Did you mean yes?
I meant yes.
Okay. I'm showing you the margin for exhibit 586. Okay, no, all right. And in this particular journal entry, are they talking about a trip that they take? Or is she talking about a trip that they take?
They're, yes. Yes, they are. They're talking about a trip to the Carlsbad Caverns.
Okay. And what about this particular journal entry is important to you in your ultimate opinion?
Well, once again, they have a very positive experience with each other. They travel, they see things that are remarkable, and most of us would experience as remarkable. I haven't been there yet. I want to go.
Oh, where do they go?
They go to the Carlsbad Caverns. They go to Roswell, to the UFO, I think to the UFO Museum, but they go to Roswell, New Mexico. And they have another connected experience that Miss Arias indicates it will be hard. She'll miss that when she returns to Wairika.
Okay. So in this particular journal entry, she's not going, taking back her decision, is she, to go?
No, she's not.
Okay. But is she talking about, is she talking positively about Mr. Alexander?
She's talking very positively about Mr. Alexander.
Okay. And is she talking about how much she's going to miss him?
Yes, she is.
Does she ultimately recognize that this is what's needed for both of them?
Yes, yes.
And does she talk about that they just can't behave when they're physically together?
Yes.
Did you get the sense she's talking about sexually?
Yes.
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
All right. Does she specifically talk about the flesh is weak?
Yes, she does.
Okay. So based on the specific words that she says, do you understand that she is talking about sexual contact, that they are, that it's physically impossible for them to behave?
Objection, speculation, lack of foundation.
Overruled. Do you mean answer? Yes or no?
Yes.
All right. And is she affirming, again, how she feels about him, how great he is?
Yes.
And does she talk in here again about her, about how she wants Mr. Alexander to be happy with Miss Hall, Mimi?
I'm not recalling that. I can look, but that's not something that I recall.
Okay, go ahead and take a look. She's talking on page 793, the bottom.
Oh, sure. Yes, she talks about them not have, that Mimi doesn't.
Sustained.
Does she talk about her, that she knows that Mr. Alexander's worried about getting married?
Yes.
And that she, is she talking about the concern she has with him wanting to be with Mimi Hall?
Yes.
And that she wants him to be happy?
That she wants him to be happy.
Okay. All right. Can we talk about, there's text messages on March 17th of 2008. And these text messages are between Mr. Alexander and Miss Arias. And the time is 9:18. And I'll ask you this, is there a point where they're talking in text messages about what a great trip they had?
Yes.
And are they very loving with each other?
They're very loving with each other and calling each other.
Objection beyond the scope.
Sustained.
And what else are they?
They're calling each other sweetheart.
Objection hearsay.
Are they calling each other loving names?
Yes, they are.
Okay. All right, and this, so after they, based on the journal entry, when from March 13th, and then just a few days later, in the text messages, and they're discussing their trip that they took over March 13th, all of this is considered what type of period in their relationship? How are they getting along?
They're getting along very well. It's a loving respite. It's a loving period of time. It's, it appears that they are connected and close with each other again.
All right. And I forgot to ask you, in the journal entry of March 13th, is there any evidence that you see when Miss Arias is talking about Mimi Hall, is there any seeds of jealousy coming from Miss Arias?
I don't see anything in the journal that would lead me to believe there's jealousy.
Okay. And when the text messages that we're discussing, is there any type of jealousy coming from Miss Arias at all with regard to Mr. Alexander seeing other people?
I haven't seen any evidence of jealousy from Jodi Arias in any of the text messages that I've read.
Okay. Judge, may we approach?
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to go back to the jury room for approximately 5 minutes. Please remember the admonition. You are excused. I told her she could. We are in recess for 5 minutes. Council, please approach. Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, the witness is ill and feels she cannot continue today. So I'm going to cancel court for the afternoon. Ask that you return tomorrow morning at 9:30. Are there any questions? Please remember the admonition. You are excused. Have a nice afternoon. We are at recess.